Good morning and welcome to the VIP seat. Today is August 22nd, and today's top stories in private aviation. We're covering Gulfstream's first flight of its G400, and SmartSky Networks is out of business. I'm your host, Jessie Naor, and I'm here today with Preston Holland. So sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. All right, Preston. So the FAA just released $291 million in grant funding under its Fueling Aviation Sustainable Transition Program. 244.5 million of which went to the production of sustainable aviation fuel. We reported this on our newsletter last week, but right after Virgin Airlines put on an advertisement last week that its first flight conducted with 100% SAF, which is the sustainable aviation fuel. The watchdog in the UK made them immediately take the ad down because, unfortunately, even though SAF is supposed to be better for the environment from the production standpoint, on a tailpipe emission standpoint, it actually produces the exact same amount of carbon emissions. So this is kind of throwing into question what's going to happen with SAF when that day comes that, okay, we're all going to magically transition to it. Is this the panacea that the whole industry is actually looking for, or are we going to have problems here?
Yeah, look, here's an interesting stat. 65 million gallons per day of jet fuel consumed. That's according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. That is a lot of fuel. So $291 is not even a drop in the bucket of a week's worth of fuel, right? So we're going to have to throw so many more dollars at this that it really needs to be the huge win that was promised, in my opinion, when kind of SAF was announced. It needs to be the huge win that says, hey, look, this is actually sustainable on a tailpipe basis and on a production basis. If not, I'm not sure that we're ever actually going to get.
Yeah, and I mean, how much it's going to cost. I think, at least $10 billion has been thrown into the industry at this point. And, we're really not that much farther than we used to be. I think in the US, there's still only 2 refineries you can get it from. And, the other part too is I was reading some of these companies, and I do understand conceptually, okay, you're not using fossil fuels, from the ground, but some of them are like taking tires and turning tires into sustainable aviation fuel. It just doesn't have the marketing buzz that I think like a lot of people were looking for. Like, okay, great. Yeah, you've reduced like emissions, from creating the fuel, and we're not actually drilling it out of the ocean. But our customer is going to be happy, and environmental is going to be happy with the fact that we're taking used tires and breaking them down into jet fuel. I just don't know.
Well, think about the optics problem that you have around ethanol. I mean, very similar concept you had in kind of in the consumer facing space. You had ethanol. There were promises. If anybody remembers when ethanol first came out, is we're going to be 100% ethanol like in 10 years, right? It eats through every conventional. We didn't know at the time, but now we know that ethanol gas eats through and corrodes engines and pipes, and it's the reason I don't put ethanol in my lawnmower. Right? Problem
Yeah,
number one.
and most
Problem number
boaters
two.
won't put it in either.
Right? Exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
boaters.
yeah.
There's a reason there's no ethanol in your avgas, right? So that's problem number one. Problem number two is there's an optics issue where we are a civilized society burning our food for fuel. Like at a certain point, there is a problem with, like, yes, maybe it's more sustainable to have ethanol, but you still have the tractors that have to go harvest it and the trucks that have to transport it. And you have the, refineries that are still, totally not carbon neutral. So there is a whole systematic change that needs to happen if we're going to get to climbing fast, going to net zero, right? So I hope that SAF is the way to the future, but frankly, I start to wonder if we need to start thinking more seriously about alternatives to SAF.
I think we do. And I also think we don't give ourselves enough credit sometimes. We're so focused on SAF right now, but I mean, talk about the 80s. We were burning 40% less than we used to. With the original, business jets that were out there. And I've always said airlines and private flyers, we have the most incentive to reduce emissions because fuel is very expensive. It's the most expensive area of our businesses. I just, I do think we need to think more outside the box in terms of technologies, because I just don't know if SAF is like the end all be all. And I know that just seems like so much of the focus today, but where's the magical winglets that someone
Yeah.
came up with? You know, like there's got to be something else in the pipeline from a technology perspective that we could just beat this issue a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I think hydrogen's super interesting, right? I mean, obviously, the speed that these companies are publishing about, with their hydrogen-powered airplanes probably don't do it for the GC Flyer, right? But for the King Air Flyer or for the, even for the mid-sized jet flyer, right? That, hey, you can fly hydrogen and have zero emissions, right? That's going to be something that you get to write about in your company press release. That's a net positive, right? So I think there's other viable verticals, and then we need to do a better job as an industry, for both of us as industry folks of celebrating that. I put something very similar on LinkedIn the other day that said, look, we really stink at talking about how great it's been. We're really good at talking about, oh, woe is me. We're really bad at, we're admitting and taking responsibility for a lot of carbon emissions. Whereas, like you said, we have done a much better job than we have in the past.
Yeah, and we're trying to fight, this environmental argument with SAF at this point, which most environmentalists are going to accuse you of greenwashing. It's like you really, if you're going to come up with a solution, it's got to be a real solution, and I hope that we can get there. But questioning just a little bit.
Well,
That's
and
all.
and and a little bit of a news flash: environmentalist groups really don't like our industry,
Right.
and that's not even necessarily because it's not even necessarily because of the carbon footprint. It has a whole lot more to do with feeling like the private aviation industry is full of entitled rich people that shouldn't
Hmm.
have the luxury to fly private. And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle that you fall on when it comes to politics. At the end of the day, the reason why people fly private is to save time and ultimately produce more economic value
Right.
that impacts positively an environment when a private aircraft comes in and is based there. So,
Yeah.
I think that we've got to do a much better job. And shout out to Ed Bolin, for really, taking charge and being in DC. I'd love to hear Ed's next speech be, hey, look at all the things that we've done this year and let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
And then say, and here's all the things that we are doing, not here's the pie in the sky, way in the future, we're going to be all SAF, because at the end of the day, like you said, that may not be enough.
Yeah.
So speaking of SAF, that takes us to our next conversation. Gulfstream has officially test flown the Gulfstream G400, which was powered with sustainable aviation fuel. The G400 completed its first flight this week in Savannah, first announced in 2021. Is touted as Gulfstream's most affordable private jet, with a price tag of just $34.5 million. What a bargain. We should order three. They're planning deliveries in 2025 after the first test flight, which took place earlier this week or last week. Today's Thursday, so trying to remember which day of the week it is. Closest competitors are the Global 5000, which is around 32 million, and the Falcon 2000 XLS around 36 million. Now, neither of those manufacturers break out individual delivery models by make and model, as reported by Gamma, but the G400 is entering what already seems like what might be a crowded category. Jesse, what do you think about the G400? Are you lining up with your deposit in hand to go place an order on a G400?
Yeah, I'm like a light jet kind of girl, so I don't know. I mean, yeah, I would if I could, I guess. Well,
You're
I
graduating from
mean,
the Phenom 300 to the Gulfstream 400, right?
that'd be great. I would love that. If someone wants to buy me one, that would be wonderful. No, I think, it's tough. It is a crowded market. I think Gulfstream still has this kind of this name, that everyone still associates with quality. It's made in the United States. I think for US customers, for corporate flight departments here, people just love Gulfstream, and a lot of pilots are very familiar with it. So I don't know. Yeah, it's probably going to be pretty competitive, but at the same time, it's a solid name.
In my opinion, it's a large cabin super mid, right? At the end of the
Mhm.
day, performance specs look a whole lot more like a super mid than it does like an ultra long range. It's got more space, which is great, right? For those people that are flying coast to coast. But it's at the end of the day, it is an airplane that's touting a 4,500 nautical mile range. Is between 4,000 and 4,500, which is almost useful to get across the pond from the United States, right? Very
Right.
useful to get coast to coast if the US is your core target. Now, I could totally see it being very successful in a place like Dubai for those folks that aren't necessarily making the jump from Dallas, Houston to, to Abu Dhabi, right?
Right.
But those that are
Right.
making the jump to, you know, Western and Eastern Europe that are going through, I can see that being attractive there, but I don't know. I think the big problem with the G400, and this is what I've seen a lot of comments, is I don't know. I don't have a here's who the customer is. For the
Hmm.
G650 and the G700, you know exactly who that customer
Oh
is.
yeah. Yeah.
For the Super Mid, you know exactly who that customer is. I don't think anybody has a picture perfect example of who the G400 buyer is.
Well, I think too, though, sometimes like people put these numbers out there of like, okay, what this airplane can do and what it can't do. And oftentimes flyers and buyers are extremely surprised that it can't do all the things that they said it was going to do. I mean, you talked about Europe, a lot of times you're going to have a stop. I mean, most of the time you're going to have a stop, even in airplanes you wouldn't think that you would. So I do think people need to be realistic about, okay, really talking to a pilot and crew member that can run the numbers and understand it. But, I think the alternative side of this, and this is what I would question if I was a Gulfstream executive, is are you cannibalizing your own customers too by saying, okay, here's this more affordable. I love that word in the press release. um,
Yeah,
Smaller aircraft.
just a smooth $34.5 million.
Cool 34, but that's why it's Gulfstream, man. Like it's only like top end, but they could potentially cannibalize a customer. But at the same time, like hangar space is an issue. So for people who want a Gulfstream, I mean, I remember a neighbor years ago in the hangar, they had literally cut a hole into their office just to get the nose of the aircraft. I think it was
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it was a G5. But I mean that 20 feet shorter that they're talking about. I mean, for a lot of people with existing hangars or corporate flight departments that have had a hangar for years and years, being able to fit it into an area, there's so many ways. There's so many areas of competition for airplanes and use cases that I assume that they've done their due diligence and they know the market and they've got an
Oh,
idea of who they're
yeah,
looking
that's
for.
the thing is Gulfstream has such a deep penetration into the Fortune 100 market
Yeah.
that they aren't going to come out with something that they haven't had at least enough customers for this to make financial sense for them to develop this, right? That have asked.
Yeah.
You think about how in a lot of ways this industry is a little bit behind the times for as technologically advanced as it is. Sometimes there's not a whole lot of data and decision making. Well, a
No.
company like Gulfstream makes data backed decisions. I mean, they're publicly traded. They have they have General Dynamics backing behind them. They're not
Yeah.
just throwing caution to the wind and saying, let's see. And as much as there have been manufacturers that have definitely done that, where they come out with something and you say, I genuinely don't think that they asked any of their customers if they wanted this. Gulfstream, they are tight enough with it and have enough market penetration in the corporate flight departments that I doubt that they're doing this just based off of a whim. So maybe
Yeah.
they deliver 12, 14, 16 airplanes in a year, and maybe that makes it viable, or maybe it's a loss leader so that they can actually go sell the more profitable G700 after the corporate flight department's now in the family and I'm tired of stopping on my way to, Eastern Europe.
Yeah. Well, and that like brings in this. There was a debate on LinkedIn early this week. I think a lot of us follow, different people, and the debate between, okay, Gulfstream is, and this is not my words, lazy for not creating a clean sheet aircraft. Like they just keep kind of going back to the same design and just modifying over time. And I was thinking to myself, like, I mean, I guess there's some points there, but at the same time, like, it's pilots like what they like. They get used to a cockpit. They get used to how an airplane's designed. Customers like the name, especially, when you're talking about a safety, something related to safety. So I don't know. What's your take on clean sheet versus just continual modification of types?
I mean, look, the G4SP is still a popular airplane, surprisingly, right? Even after it's been out of production for I'm not sure how long, right? So Gulfstream obviously has a platform that works, and as you look across, the interesting piece about Gulfstream is when I analyze their lines, and I think Gulfstream more so than anybody else. You have the G280, which happens to be it happens to have the Gulfstream badge, but and be sold by the Gulfstream family, but that's about it, right? And then you
Yeah.
have the whole rest of the set, right? The oval windows, what you come to expect. I mean, I was at the airport taxiing in a 172 on Sunday night, and there goes a 550, and you can close your eyes and you know exactly what's taken off, right? The only difference is you're counting the windows to figure out, is it a 550 or a 650? Gulfstream has an equation that works. I think that if it's not broke, don't fix it. One, two, if you can bring an airplane to market that's actually profitable, that is net positive for the rest of the industry. As you look at some of these manufacturers, I think I look at Bombardier specifically. Part of Bombardier's troubles, call it 5, 10, 15 years ago, was that they tried to do too much too fast, you know, totally horizontally integrate. We're going to do clean sheet designs. I mean, when you're talking about a clean sheet design that may cost a company $1 billion or multiple billions of dollars, like the 777 or all these clean sheet designs, sure, that's great, but it's not great for the long term longevity of the actual company because they're going to have to
Yeah.
make a return on that investment. And what a lot of people miss, and I think that this is the piece that whether folks just out of business school or all the way up through this, they forget that at $34.5 million, Gulfstream is not making $34.5 million. There is cost of goods sold. There is SG&A. There's a lot of costs that go into bringing that airplane to market. So if they sell 16 and maybe they make $5 million a piece, you're talking about an $80 million just gross margin, right? And that's,
Yeah.
that's after you talk about all your cost of goods sold on $1 billion project, the payback time is like 14 years, right? So like,
Yeah.
yes, I get being critical of Gulfstream for not doing clean sheet, but frankly, especially as we talked about at the top of the story, if we're sitting here wondering exactly who the customer is, they're not going to sell 100 of them, right?
Right.
Most likely in the first year, right? They're not, their order book is not full for 6 years. So that's, that's my take on it. I say keep on going Gulfstream. And if you find an actual gap in the market, maybe the, G300 or, 295 or whatever, whatever it is. They're running out of numbers is their problem.
Yeah.
I think they've got 900 left. And that's
Well,
it.
and
So
I think too, I mean, the world's kind of changed. I mean, Boeing has created certification problems for everyone. And I think, we're probably going to see a lot more of this. Why would I start from scratch and from zero when I know it's going to take me years and years and years and years to get approvals? And in some cases, rightly so. Like I can't slam the FAA for putting a little more, oversight on folks. But that's just going to be more of the reality of what we're dealing with in the industry is that we may not see as many of these designs just because the regulatory environment has changed
yeah.
for
Speaking
the
of
good or
which,
worse.
the I've been told that the FAA 135 conformity in our neck of the woods, we're done for the fiscal year, right? The FAA is underfunded. They do not have the resources nor the talent nor the time nor the incentives even to do a lot of this stuff which would propel the industry forward, right? So I think it's going to take a team effort and, we're going to have to fix it. FCCs, on the other hand, like what they're doing for Starlink, is I think what's really interesting and might lead us into the next story.
So SmartSky is out of business. And I'm really bummed because I've been covering this for a while. I've been doing a column in Aviation Week for a few years. And fascinating times for in-flight Wi-Fi, especially if you're a space geek like me, because Elon Musk, Intelstat, others are launching. And I'm going to get into some technical stuff here, but I think it's important that people understand, kind of like what's going on competitively and why there are all the differences. So Starlink is a LEO constellation, low Earth orbit constellation of satellites that are, beaming information down to the Earth and giving you Wi-Fi in your airplane and in your RV and everywhere else. How SmartSky and competitor GoGo have operated is beaming that Wi-Fi from ground stations up to the airplane. It's called air to ground. SmartSky was an air to ground operation, but they closed their doors a couple days ago, completely unannounced. I don't think anyone knew anything about this, and then all of a sudden, boom, on the website, they're done. And my understanding is that there's no signal. The equipment you invested in is now just a paperweight, which is very
You
upsetting
are
for a lot of customers.
SOSOL. SOL.
Yeah. No, I can't imagine being in that situation. And a lot of like big fleet operators were equipping their airplanes with this equipment. I know Flight Exclusive had announced doing that and others. And honestly, it was a big leap forward for air to ground because the GoGo network is pretty old. They've been upgrading and changing it over time. But I mean, you're talking about a much more older network versus SmartSky, who got, $365 million to build this network, boom, just going out of business one day. So that's very surprising. But I think it just shows you there's more to come for this industry because people see the Starlinks and the others coming to market and going, oh, this might not be the place that we need to be. Like eventually, there's going to be so many satellites beaming networks down that, it doesn't make sense to have air to ground anymore.
And pretty soon we're going to have particle movement, across. Thank you, Elon Musk. And then we're not even going to need airplanes, right? That'll be even better.
There we go. Just like beam me up and down somewhere.
Beam me up. Beam me
Well,
up,
and
Scotty.
it's
Which apparently was never actually. Fun fact about that line. Apparently, that was actually never said in the movie exactly as that. I learned that on Twitter last week. That the words
oh my
"beam me
gosh.
up, Scotty." It was always variations of that sentence, but it wasn't actually said in those exact order of
Wow.
words. Anyways, side tangent,
Well,
but
I'm gonna
relevant because
I'm
we're
gonna
talking
keep
about
saying it
beaming
anyway.
stuff, with satellites. Yeah,
No, well,
exactly.
I mean the thing is here, like and we're not only talking about the Elon. Like, first of all, these air to ground systems, they're competing with the billionaires. So you have the Elon Musk. I think Amazon's got their own version that they're trying to put into the sky, and the entire Canadian government is funding one, and the UK is funding one. I mean, this is becoming so competitive on a global scale. It's going to be harder and harder for anyone trying to provide connectivity in this way. I know GoGo has actually been positioning itself with OneWeb, who is another low Earth orbit provider. So I think they're making
Earth, Earth.
to Earth. So I think that's going to be helpful for them, and hopefully, gets them into the right positioning for, this. And they're the exclusive distributor of the OneWeb system. So I think that's smart because obviously the tides are
Yeah.
changing and the technology's changing and they're going to have to change with it too.
The big thing, I mean, as you talk about, if you remember back to business school, you remember about, doing a SWOT analysis, right? So you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? I think so many times, I think SmartSky is a great example that they got way too focused in the O category. And they said opportunity, opportunity, opportunity. They did not have any consideration for the threats or what are the weaknesses in our technology. It was here's what we're really good at and here's what the opportunities are, right? So I think this is a great example of the innovator's dilemma, where you really need to iterate, but at some point the 8-track's going to get replaced with the CD, right? And so if you don't see that coming, the 8-track was incredibly innovative at the time. And then it got replaced and it was no longer innovative, right? This is the technology cycle that unfortunately we find ourselves in. And in the hardware business, it's so hard. The hardware, you talk to anybody in Silicon Valley and everybody says hardware is, I would not ever want to do hardware because it is, you have to be the winner. There is one winner. That is it, right? You look at
Obsolescence.
Apple. I mean, I would not, Android is a winner internationally, but not in the United States, right? So it's a duopoly type situation or a monopoly. It's not, oh yeah, we could be a disruptor and a challenger here. I think the
Yeah.
interesting thing too is that, I mean, $365 million is a bunch of money. And then just to that's raising, not including these Wi-Fi systems cost $100, $200, $300,000 to put on your airplane, and then are
Yeah.
10 grand a month. Like we're not talking about like your lifetime value of a customer is way more than like cell phone providers. So it's like,
Yeah.
and then just boom, we're done, out of business. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the fundraising environment that we're in right now is hard, and I'm sure it takes a long time to profit out of building a network like that and the equipment. But I think investors, it's not a good time for investors, and they obviously see that, at some point this technology is going to be obsolete, and they're just not willing to pony it up anymore, especially in today's environment.
Yeah, I mean, you watch Starlink announcing that iPhone SMS messaging in iOS as soon as the next release of the iPhone iOS, and it's going to be hardware agnostic, right? You're going to be able to send text messages anywhere in the world pretty much, right? That you have Starlink access. That all of a sudden that basically put multiple businesses out of business, like with that announcement, right?
Yeah.
Technology comes at you fast, and you have to be really entrenched. I do have a couple friends who fly their own SR-22s, and I have seen lots of iterations of Starlink in the back of single-engine piston airplanes. Not STC'd, nothing's drilled, everything's temporarily attached, and nothing has permanent power. So everything is kosher. They said that it works great. They text me from the air, and they're like, "Hey, I'm texting you from the air, from
That's
9,500 feet."
crazy.
And they'll send me a selfie with them with their oxygen, and it's like, all right, the future is here.
Oh my gosh. That's so, I mean, actually, the same thing was happening in the yachting industry. They were taking the RV ones and sticking them on the super yachts because the super yacht version was like $100,000 to buy. That's probably a made up number, but it was expensive. And they were putting the RV ones on.
Probably not that made up though.
But
It's
eventually,
probably not far off.
Elon figured it out and he turned them off over water. So, watch out, guys. Don't invest too much.
Yeah. He's gonna get you. He's gonna get you at altitude. So, well, speaking of fundraising, there is a company in the charter space that has done a fair amount of fundraising, gone public, and this week had some interesting news. Quick disclaimer here. While we sometimes discuss publicly traded companies on the VIP seat, please note that we are not financial advisors. No recommendation or advice on investments is being made in discussing these companies and their performance. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please do not see this as financial advice. You're welcome, Mr. Lawyer. Anyways, there was a story that floated around. Flying Magazine broke that there is maybe trouble at Volato. Basically, they're getting out of 6 of their more expensive leases on their leased HondaJet fleet. They are furloughing some pilots. That has not been disclosed exactly how many pilots they're furloughing, but they are quote unquote right-sizing the business in order to continue operations. After receiving a non-compliance letter from the New York Stock Exchange in June, the company intends to fund its operations through a combination of issuing debt and equity, as well as the sale of aircraft at a premium cost. That aircraft has yet to be determined which aircraft that will be. The first Gulfstream G280, which carries an average price tag of $25 million, was delivered last week. More HondaJet deliveries and G280s are expected through the end of the year. Jesse, what is going on here?
I think there are cracks. Look, a lot of these, a lot of these companies went public during the SPAC craze, and there are a lot of companies that probably went public prematurely, even though they weren't really ready to do so. Combined with the fact that we know charter is way down from COVID highs. We all kind of got a sugar rush there for a while, and now we're kind of coming back to reality. This is, what happened to Wheels Up recently too. There were reports that it was anywhere from 11 to 20% of their pilot team was furloughed. They also began reducing fleet size. So we're seeing this happening kind of to everyone. Now, and the thing that concerns me with them at this point, they ended Q2 with $5.4 million in cash and cash equivalents, but that was inclusive of securing $4 million in debt financing. They are, living paycheck to paycheck in so many words at this point. They're still operating, and they're a publicly traded firm, so they do have options and things, but I think the stress is there for everybody, and they're the next one to see this right now.
And the options chain is not so much as that you can really speculate, because this is not look, at the end of the day, this is a small cap company, right?
Yes.
It may be big in our world, but that does not make it big in the world of financials. 5.4 million in cash and cash equivalents. The other thing to point out is a lot of their deferred revenue, right? So on the jet card model, one thing to point out, and I a lot of end clients that ask me about this pretty regularly, and I actually wrote an article that says how to know if your charter operator is going to make it, right? And basically pointed out that there is a concept in subscription where you have deferred liability, right? So I'm going to take your money today, and then I'm going to promise you something in the future. I'm going to have to use the cash that I have promised you. I have to use the cash that I have now to fulfill people that I promised yesterday. And then tomorrow I'm going to have to use that cash in order to or I'm going to have to generate some sort of cash that I can provide for you in the future, right? And
Hmm.
this is when you start factoring your jet cards and you start using some financial instruments that are designed to function like this, right? Factoring is not a nasty word, right? It is a financial tool that CFOs use often to increase cash flow. But when you start playing these games with, well, we're just going to issue debt in order to fulfill and continue operations, and we have to grow at all costs. I mean, one thing that I think a lot of people forget is that NetJets was not a viable business when Warren Buffett bought it. He has said that
Yeah.
multiple times in
Right.
in some of his annual letters and things. It was not viable. Like it was, they had to put so much money into Berkshire Hathaway. Luckily, they had the giant balance sheet and the belief of Warren and Charlie that said, we're going to make this thing work. But it took a long time to get there.
Yeah.
So like it's really tough to make money, especially in the light jet market. I mean, a little bit easier in the heavier jet market. I mean, what one thing that we saw on LinkedIn was the AirX news.
Yeah. AirX, and this is still not official. According to a Sky News report, they're in talks to complete a sale of 25% stake for $250 million, which is a nice billion-dollar valuation if that goes through. But again, they are a different model than, the Volato is a small aircraft. AirX, sometimes they have large charter aircraft that they're moving sports teams on. It's a different concept entirely. But that is kind of a silver lining right here is that, okay, even though the market's got a crunch right now, we've got financing problems, we have salary issues, all sorts of issues. I mean, somebody's doing well. So something must be, going well out there. I used to run Grandview Aviation, and a lot of people said, you can't make money with light jets. I can tell you can. I can tell you it's extremely difficult, and you have to be extremely disciplined and have a solid business model.
One comment that I did see that was interesting on LinkedIn was that AirX is incredibly disciplined on their purchase. They
Mhm.
really take more of a commercial real estate model where you're making money on the buy, not on the sell. And so
Yes.
they're buying really high pedigree used aircraft that have carried its own depreciation, but still have a lot of useful life left in them. And so, I think having that discipline, Volato is the other side of that equation, right? Taking delivery of brand new airplanes. Oftentimes, if you look at Volato's balance sheet, there's actually not a lot of airplanes on the balance sheet, right? So like
Hmm.
a lot of this is unsecured debt, right? They're not necessarily they're selling off fractionals, right? They have
Hmm.
historically been a fractional business. They dry lease the airplane back from individual, unique beneficial owners that are high net worth guys that need the depreciation. So a little bit of a different model.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see how it goes. They are publicly traded, so we get to look at everything they do every 3 months. So that not everybody has to go through that scrutiny, but it is interesting for
Yeah,
us.
exactly.
So and it's just we like the numbers. We want to read the numbers. So last story of the day. This is interesting to me. So the National Business Aviation Association has always been a partner in the European Business Aviation Convention and exhibition. That's a lot of words. EBACE. So NBAA has now sold part of its
EBACE.
shares.
Yep.
EBACE has sold its share back to the European Business Aviation Association because, I mean, there were reports that there have been declines in exhibitors over the years. In 2019, there were 400 exhibitors at the convention, but this May, that number had declined to 257. So this news is coming on the heels of, that decline and people kind of critiquing certain issues about the show. So I personally have never been to EBACE because honestly, hotels in Geneva were very expensive. I could never justify the ROI, but I was a domestic operator. What about you, Preston? What have you heard out there?
Yeah. I mean, look, at $800 a night to stay at a shack in Geneva and eat $20 tiny, Belgian waffles. Um, tough to make the argument that it had a lot of value. I think the other thing that this show really faces is a lot of headwinds in the general sentiment towards business aviation in Europe. There is an underlying current in that market that has a certain level of disdain for
Mm-hmm.
personal and business aviation. And I think that that is playing out in the amount of exhibitors that are at EBACE. I think the other thing too is that these companies like so you have the OEMs which carry the show, right? And for better or for worse, we as an industry look up to the big dogs to make sure that we can all eat the fancy food and go to the fancy parties, right? And then we go to the fuel company parties. And if you're an industry person, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not an industry person, go to MBAA and get an invite to one of the
Fuel
fuel
party.
company parties.
Come back.
Um,
Yep,
exactly.
yep,
Yeah,
yep.
if you're listening. But I think that the big problem is that these companies like Gulfstream and Bombardier that have pulled out of a place like eBay, they're not seeing the value in these mass production shows where they can, for equivalent or lower cost, put on their own boutique events in which they can invite their very targeted prospects and say, because like, look, Gulfstream and Bombardier, I mean, they deliver like 60 airplanes a year.
Yeah,
They're not wondering who their customer is, right? Like
yeah.
they know exactly who's looking at their airplanes, right? So when they call Kylie Kardashian and say, "Hey, do you want to come to this like super exclusive thing, or do you want to come to like Henderson Airport and like sweat and look at airplanes?" Right? It's like I think that a lot of these OEMs are starting to question and say, "Is this actually where I'm going to go have end customers?" Or not, right? And so they're
Yeah,
starting to ask, is the ROI there? And then with the OEMs goes the rest of the industry. Now, for me personally, I find huge return on investment for attending MBAA base because
for
I'm
sure.
an American. I'm in American business aviation, right? So like I get to see folks that I only get to see once a year. I get to make connections with those people. We get to go, I get to go watch some of the folks blow a lot of money at the blackjack tables, right? And there's some value there, right? But for
Yeah.
me to travel across to Europe and stay in an expensive hotel, just not sure it's there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, America's the big market, so I think NBA is going to continue to be strong. I think some of these OEMs, though, are missing out, and it's not aspirational customers, it's industry insiders understanding the different lineup of products. They've gated things off now, so you can't necessarily go and see the airplanes. You don't know what you're looking at. You're just looking at it from afar. But you have to remember, I mean, the supply chain and the process that customers go through to buy your product. At the end of the day, it might be a charter broker that was like, "Oh man,
Mm-hmm.
I was on this G400. This thing is awesome, and it has this and it has that." Those all little the voices in people's heads. When you only sell that many airplanes a year, there's still like a community of people who need to understand what the products are to support
Right.
that sales process.
Well,
And you
yeah,
miss
and
out when you don't get to go on
yeah,
them.
yeah, totally agree. I think that is. I think if there's one message of like one thing to solve for this for large OEM operators is that you like understand the value of the network effect and
Mhm.
understand that Jessie and Preston have conversations with your end clients we on a regular basis, right? I
Yeah,
know you do. I know that I do. And us having to get gate kept, we're industry folks, right? At
yeah,
the end of the day, and if you gatekeep folks like the influencers, if you gatekeep them, they're not going to have good things to say about your product, and they're going to say something really
right,
nice about your competitor across the field that welcomed them and fed them coffee and champagne and said,
right,
"Hey, we recognize that our industry partners, that this is a whole ecosystem. And for us
right,
to sell the 40, 30 or 40 airplanes that we sell a year, like there's a lot of folks, there's a lot of management companies, there's a lot of charter
right,
brokers, there's a lot of friends, right? Insurance agents, finance folks, brokers, right? They're calling the
right.
folks like Johnny Foster and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about buying something new. What should I buy?" Right? So like gatekeeping the whole industry, I think is not necessarily having the positive return on is hurting the positive return on investment.
Yeah. No, I get they need to save money, and I get you don't want, a million people traipsing on your airplane, but at the end of the day, people in the industry need to understand the products at the same time. Give them a chance to touch and feel it at least once, at least some, period of time of that day or something. But yeah, we could talk industry events all day long. But at the VIP seat, we're trying to keep these short and sweet so that you get everything you need to know for the week in a quick take. So with that, we will wrap up the pod. Thank you for joining us today. The VIP seat is the fastest way to get the top news on what's happening. And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly email digest in the show notes and click follow wherever you get your podcast. Comments and suggestions on whatever we should cover next are always welcome. So stay in touch, and we'll see you next time on the VIP seat.